Hey guys, Wyatt Claypool here. Since they took office, Prime Minister Mark Carney's Liberal government has been great at talking tough and making big promises. But when it comes to actual follow through, so far they have been objectively terrible. And I don't think there is anything different with this memorandum of understanding between Carney and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. Now, Smith obviously wants a pipeline built well before she was premier, when she was a radio show host, she was consistently wanting more pipelines built, whether it was to the West Coast or the East Coast. But Carney and many of his Liberal MPs have been obviously anti pipeline this entire time. They have openly said no to more pipeline development in Canada. Carney was on the record in a committee meeting with Pierre, then just an MP and not the leader, asking him why he's in favor of pipeline development in other countries, but not Canada. And Carney had this ridiculous, rambling answer about why Canada shouldn't be building pipelines, but they should be building pipelines in Saudi Arabia and Qatar and elsewhere. Now, Carney is trying to cast himself as Mr. Pipeline, but he may have actually entrapped himself. The man has played himself because he has perfectly fed into the Conservatives' hands, and now they will be putting forward a motion vote to ask all of the Liberal MPs, will you vote on the record, yay or nay, for a pipeline going from Alberta to the West Coast with a suspension of the tanker ban so tankers can actually move the oil and gas products to Asia to be sold? Because so many Liberal MPs, when Carney was signing this MOU, basically were signaling in the media, oh, yes, we've signed an MOU with Alberta, but don't worry, David Eby in British Columbia and all the First Nations can still block it. They would say it in a more diplomatic way, like, oh, of course, we'll still need their sign off and we still have to do consultations and we'll want to work with the BC government. They're effectively trying to basically assure their green liberal base that no worries, we have found ways to make sure this thing will never happen. Carney will say yes, but the First Nations will say no, or Carney will say yes, but don't worry, David Eby will say no. And from what has been tweeted by some of David Eby's own MLAs in the last 24 hours, they are still on the side of no. But I want to break this down a little bit more in just a second here with the motion being put forward by the Conservatives. But before I do that, I just actually want to plug a little interview I did with Kat Canada on her YouTube channel. I will be linking in the description below that video as well as pinning it in the top of the comments. And then I also want to pin the documentary that the party I work for put out recently. It's the One BC Party Caucus, put out the Making a Killing documentary about the Kamloops grave hoax, as well as the reconciliation industry takeover of British Columbia. That will also be linked below the Cat Canada interview. I encourage you guys to watch both of them. They're fantastic. And then also like, share, subscribe, all that usual stuff. Sorry, I'm holding up the video. I also want to address this because I know I'm going to get comments about it. This is the clock that shows how many subscribers I have. But for some reason, oh, okay, well, I got that to come back. But for some reason, it's not displaying this number correctly. I assume when it gets to the next number, it will reset itself and it won't look kind of so janky. But I know if I don't say that, people are going to want me to address it. It's like how I got a call on my phone yesterday and people are hearing the buzzing of my phone and people start asking me who was calling me. That was my friend Justin, and now you know. Anyways, but here is from Rob Shaw from Czech News in British Columbia. He says, Mark Carney's government may be in an uncomfortable position next week after the Conservative Party announced they will be tabling a motion to support an oil pipeline from Alberta to Deepwater Port on BC's coast, language from MOU, putting Liberal Party BC MPs in potential spot of voting against the government's own MOU. And that's probably what's going to happen because we've basically heard from MPs like Talib Nur Muhammad and Jonathan Wilkinson that don't worry. I'm kind of restating what I've already said, but don't worry, guys. It's never going to happen because Carney has put a veto in for everybody and their cat into this MOU. Now, I know there are some Albertans who have been criticizing Danielle Smith. Why would she ever sign this MOU? She knows that Carney's untrustworthy. She kind of has to play the role of being naive in the situation. Because if she says, well, this is not worth the paper it's written on, it's the Liberals, of course they're just going to lie, blah, 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 the thing is, the media and the Liberals will say, oh, see, that's why there's no pipeline. She doesn't believe in it enough. She doesn't believe in Tinkerbell, so Tinkerbell died. So Danielle Smith is having to be deliberately naive in this whole situation. But again, it's actually been a way of entrapping Carney, because Carney is making it seem like the pipeline is very real. But now the Conservatives can put them on the spot and ask, well, how real is it? Let's have your own MPs say they fully endorse this plan and they hope it actually gets done. And so the Conservatives are very giddy about this thing being put forward. I liked this post by Katie Merrifield, who is the communications director for Pierre Poilievre's office. And she said, see you next Tuesday, Talib, at being Talib Noor Mohammed. Have a great weekend. Because he was really getting into it with her this last week, attacking her over some stupid, nonsensical points. And now he gets to be the one in an uncomfortable position, having to argue in favor or against a new pipeline. And so here is Pierre Poilievre showing what the opposition motion is going to be. He says, we need a pipeline to the Pacific. On Tuesday, the House of Commons will vote on a Conservative motion for a new oil pipeline to the Pacific coast, overriding the tanker ban to ship bitumen to Asia. Bring home jobs, put Canada first. And this is what the opposition motion will read. Opposition motion A, take note of the Memorandum of Understanding between Canada and Alberta of November 27th, 2025, and B, supports the construction of one or more pipelines enabling the export of at least 1 million barrels a day of low-emission Alberta bitumen from a strategic deepwater port on the British Columbia coast to reach Asian markets, including through an appropriate adjustment to the Oil Tanker Memorandum Act, while respecting the duty to consult Indigenous people. I honestly wouldn't have even included the last part of duty to consult, because it's kind of a misnomer that you're consulting Indigenous people. You're consulting left-wing controlled band councils. Many of the people on Indigenous band councils or First Nations band councils are left-wing activists, like Grand Chief Stuart Phillip. You can consult, but at least they shouldn't be given a veto. So I understand why the Conservatives said consult, but not, let them have a veto in all this. They shouldn't have a veto. It's ridiculous that it's not even like some people say, why are 5% of the population in British Columbia able to control the entire province? And they're talking about First Nations. It's not even 5%. It's like 0.0001%, because the vast majority of First Nations people are perfectly fine with resource development. It's the activists who end up having high positions in their government who are incentivized to say no, because again, they're left-wing greenie activists. But in response to what Pierre Poilievre said here, and I think it's very much kind of indicating why the Liberals are going to be uncomfortable, interim NDP leader Don Davey says, Liberals are violating a 50-year oil tanker ban, one they long defended and just enshrined in law to satisfy Conservatives for a bitumen pipeline. It's clear only the NDP will protect the BC coast, defend Indigenous rights, and address the climate crisis. And this is why the Liberals are in a really tough spot, because they have trained a large portion of their base to hate pipelines and to think that basically the climate crisis makes any fossil fuel development, pipeline, or exportation of oil and gas is not just bad, it's evil. And so the NDP may end up eating the Liberals' lunch on this one, because even if the Liberals vote in favor of it, which will make them look better in front of what I'll call their blue Liberal base or their business Liberal base, they'll end up looking bad to their orange Liberals that they just took on board in this last election. Because remember, in a normal federal election, the NDP usually get like 15 to 20% of the vote, maybe 14 to 20. This last election, they only got 6.6%. So most of their vote either stayed home or went to the Liberals. So the NDP have a very good path here to winning back a bunch of their support by showing that the Liberals are not left-wing enough. And they're already taking it from their left flank, because they ended up losing Elizabeth May, as she is mad about the MOU being signed and saying that she will never vote for anything else the Liberals do now. So let's just take a look at this CTV News question period clip, where now Elizabeth May, the Green Party leader and only Green MP, saying she regrets voting for the budget and she will never vote with them again.
Include then, kind of jumping off that point, and bridging where we started, which is the fact that you cast that very integral vote to support the budget and keep the government in power. You said never say never. Does that mean that you have not ruled out supporting them on other matters of confidence, or will you take a hard line on this?
We're going to have to change. They have to change their policies. Right now, we've got a prime minister who got to office largely with progressive voters thinking this is I had so many members of the Green Party email and say we're ending our Green Party membership long enough to vote for Mark Carney in the Liberal leadership because he's a climate guy. A lot of people believe that this was a prime minister who would act on climate. So I may have voted for the budget because I thought he would. A lot of Canadians voted Liberal because they thought he would. So there's disillusioned voters out there, a lot of them. There's disillusioned Liberal MPs who are wondering whether Will Graves, the MP for Victoria, who said he very worried about lifting the tanker ban, and Patrick Weiler, West Vancouver Sunshine Coast, Nathaniel Erskine-Smith, people saying, this is not what we expected, and not to misquote Patrick Weiler, but he said, look, the prime minister's going to have to explain the flip-flop on the subsidies to enhanced oil recovery. It's not just me who's wondering, how did this happen that a prime minister we thought was going to stand for certain things is standing for other things? And for viewers, I'm not taking away from the fact we're dealing with Trump, we're dealing with national unity.
I can cut it off there because now it's just random trying to show that, no, I'm not against everything liberals are doing. It's just random pablum now. But this is very funny because the liberals are not pro-oil pipeline enough to hold on to those business liberals, those blue liberals who actually swing between the conservatives and the liberals depending on the election. But they're now no longer progressive enough for the progressive voters that they've taken on board, and they're taking it from their left flank by both Elizabeth May at the Greens as well as Don Davies at the NDP. And no doubt you will see a lot of the NDP leadership candidates running on the idea that they're going to oppose the Liberals tooth and nail from this point because they've become too conservative, because they've signed this MOU. That's effectively what Stephen Guilbeault said when he ended up resigning from the Liberals cabinet. He's probably going to resign from office fully later. He's a Liberal MP, but very much a Green Liberal, saying that this was a bridge too far and I can't support this anymore, so that's why I'm leaving cabinet. Again, a lot of these Liberal MPs, it would probably be rational for them to all vote in favor of the motion. But some of them are in ridings that I would say are irrational when it comes to pipelines, or at the very least, their base in the pipeline in the riding says they're anti-pipeline. So even though the majority of voters in that riding would like them to be pro-pipeline, the thing is a lot of those pro-pipeline voters are just going to vote conservative anyways because they're the more pure pro-pipeline party anyways. And again, the Liberals aren't really pro-pipeline. They'll say they want to get it done, but then again, they'll just bake in a bunch of vetoes to a bunch of people that don't actually matter in order to make sure the pipeline never happens. I want to get to this other post right here where we have Thomas Mulcair trying to kind of I guess, poo-poo the idea of this vote, saying, oh, the conservatives are just having fun. No, I actually sometimes agree with Thomas Mulcair, despite being a former NDP leader. I think he's a fairly shrewd political and commentator since leaving politics. But on this, the conservatives are not having fun. They are, in fact, making the liberals put their money where their mouth is. And thank you for Mark Nixon for clipping this and putting on X.
All right, let's talk about Green Party leader Elizabeth May on CTV's Question Period, saying she regrets supporting the budget and that the Liberals cannot count on her vote going forward. What do you make of her comments?
Well, she's trying to put a whole heck of a lot of green toothpaste back into the tube, because she came out as soon as the budget was tabled. She kept using the word absolutely. I will absolutely never vote for this budget. I will absolutely never vote for this budget. And then she voted for the budget. And so nobody could understand that. She was heavily criticized by people in environmental groups for having done that. Now she's got a lengthy explanation that in her negotiations, she had obtained something about whether or not you could use tax credits for oil recovery and stuff like that. It sounds very complicated. There was one very easy win for Elizabeth May in there. There was a $2 billion tree planting program. Great way to sequester carbon, by the way, is have a bunch of trees. And the Liberal Party of Mark Carney decided to get rid of that program for reasons that are still inexplicable. And she had an easy win on the table. All she had to do was ask for something concrete that people could understand. And then she could say, I'm going to vote for the budget.
This actually might not be the clip I was looking for, but I think you guys I think that one's still at least pertinent because of just how bad Elizabeth May's now looking, having to walk everything back. Which one am I trying to find? Is this it? I think I found the right one. This is always the annoying thing when you got to find the right clip and you line them up wrong. But that one was still at least interesting to listen to.
Leader Tom, welcome.
Good to be with you, Renee.
Let's start with this pipeline vote that Poilievre is planning to force in the House this week. Your thoughts? What's the strategy here, and what are you expecting the outcome to be?
Well, I have trouble suppressing a smile for having spent so many years in opposition. I recognize a really good play by an opposition party when I see one. And this is more fun than anything else because it doesn't actually produce any results. It's a take note debate. And basically people are asked to vote whether they recognize and accept the agreement, the memorandum of understanding between the feds and Alberta. Now, here's the fun part for Poilievre. He is very much aware, as is everyone, that there are members of Carney's caucus who are very uneasy with that deal. But since they don't get to express themselves publicly, anything that's been talked about in caucus stays in caucus. So none of that bubbles out unless you get a resignation, as in the case of Stephen Guilbeault. So lo and behold, the Conservatives have used a very old trick. They're using an opposition day motion to bring it forward and say, look, we want to give you the chance to vote on this memorandum of understanding. And they've done something even trickier. They've fooled around with the wording. There is a substantive difference between the wording of the memorandum of understanding and the motion. And it has to do with whether or not you would have to have an amendment to the tanker ban on the north coast of British Columbia. So Poilievre is really having far too much fun. I think that
the thing is, I would disagree with Tom Mulcair. This is not fun. I think there actually is concrete things coming out of this. Because again, I think Canadians do need to see where the Liberals actually stand. Are they just fooling around? Because I would say Carney is the one having fun with his pretend support for pipelines, and now Poilievre is making him actually put his money where his mouth is. It's not just political theatrics. The whole point is that they are cutting through the propaganda of the Liberals and seeing where a bunch of these Liberal MPs actually stand on their own deal. And it is very smart for them to go even further than what the MOU said, because the MOU never actually said anything about a tanker ban, like lifting it. It just kind of basically muddles through the idea that we should export. It doesn't actually say it's going to functionally get rid of the tanker ban in order so that the pipeline is functional. It just kind of basically vaguely says a pipeline should be built and we should, in theory, export. And so by making that language very clear, Poilievre's Conservatives are forcing these Liberal MPs who just want to, at the most, they'll say, yo, I'm vaguely in favor of the idea that we should ship more oil. But now they actually have to say yes to a very specific plan that is obviously implied by the MOU, which is building to the West Coast, getting rid of the tanker ban, and exporting. They never thought that they were going to have to be this clear because they do not want the environmental groups that they usually rely on for support picketing outside of their offices and saying that they're conservative sellouts and all this stuff. So again, Carney has effectively played himself in all this, wanting to talk tough, and now Poilievre can force him to actually at least rhetorically deliver by being specific in what he wants to do. Anyways, that should be it. Oh, actually, no, that's not it for today. Actually, I just want to bring up one more thing here, and that is we have Ravi Parmar from the BC NDP reacting to this headline from the CBC. We'll just talk about the headline first. He is the Minister of Forestry in the BC NDP government, and the CBC headline says, EB warns proposed pipeline project could become an energy vampire. And now, as you can see, on the day I'm filming this, December 7th, 3 hours ago, Ravi Parmar says, the Premier sums it up perfectly. An idea, and that's all it is so far, that was developed without First Nations input, without BC input, and one that threatens our economy. It's an energy vampire, and we cannot let it interrupt our progress. So yes, the NDP government in British Columbia is saying no. You don't really come back from calling the pipeline an energy vampire and say, oh yeah, sure, we can let the energy vampire be built. The BC NDP government has already said no. The Grand Chief of the First Nations, it's kind of like an amalgamation of all the First Nations band councils, but the guy who is the Grand Chief of all of them, Stuart Phillip, has already said no as well. So this thing is not happening. And now the Conservatives are also forcing them to, the Liberals on a federal level, to vote on the idea that we can consult, but at the end of the day, we have to build. Build it, suspend the tanker ban, consult, But at the end of the day, we're not giving vetoes to anybody because the federal Liberal government is the only one, the only entity that actually has to say yes in all of this. Anyways, but we will definitely be back on Tuesday or Wednesday the next day to talk about how this ends up going with the vote, because you are going to see a lot of nervous Liberals either finding reasons to, like, really bad reasons that they can still vote in favor of it, but not violating their environmental principles, or abstaining, or the Liberals just finding a way of not voting for it entirely. I wonder if they're all just going to walk out on the vote saying the vote's a trick, so we're not going to put up with it. But anyways, with that all being said, thank you guys for watching. Go check out the interview I did with Cat Canada and the Making a Killing documentary, both linked in the description below and pinned at the top of the comments. And, with all that being said, very clunky outros here, guys. I'm very sorry that all this is so clunky. I'll get better. I'm only been back in the studio for like 2 days here, and everything feels alien again. But again, with all that being said, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all next time.